It's been 20 plus years and both sides have suffered loss within the culture wars. Talking with those on both sides of the battlefield, cultural diplomacy unites theology and culture in open, peaceful dialogue with the goal of reconstruction instead of destruction. Here are the show's hosts and founders of Ceasefire Strategies, Eric Bumpus and Tim Moranville. Hello and welcome to Cultural Diplomacy. I'm your host, Eric Bumpus.
And I'm your co-host, Tim Moranville. And this week we're joined by Kyle Saylors. Kyle and Kenny Saylors, who are two independent filmmakers originating from Texas. They're currently a directing, producing, and writing team of brothers who have spent well over a decade in the entertainment business, working in television, music videos, documentaries, and motion pictures. And we'll be discussing their latest documentary called Hollywood on Fire, which explores the past, present, and future of faith in the entertainment industry.
And as we said, we're talking about the spiritual climate of Hollywood today. Many believe nothing good can come out of L.A. and quite literally hate Hollywood. Today's guests have made a documentary shattering the perspective that there are no Christians in Hollywood. A finalist for the International Family Film Festival, official selection of the Gideon Media Arts Conference, and gaining a 5-Dove seal of approval from the Dove Foundation, Hollywood on Fire explores the past, present, and future of faith in the entertainment industry. Neither 100% religious or 100% in the shadows of a dark conspiracy, Kyle will be sharing with us about the need or vision for how Christians can shape culture, as well as discussing their own involvement in Hollywood. So we know that there are Christians in the industry, but maybe some find confusion as to what Christians are doing within Hollywood or why they're there. And to kind of get our definition straight, I want to explain that what we mean by Hollywood is we mean that mainstream studio system, not specifically the geographical area or encompassing independent film, but the studio system or mainstream industry. But give us a little bit of the history behind this project. Why was this film made?
Well, first of all, when I was growing up, I came from a home that I couldn't even go to the movies till I was, almost a senior in high school. Actually, I wasn't allowed even then, but I went, and so I came from a very strong Christian home, and which was good, but they did not understand and just thought that Hollywood it's just a bad place and it's all full of bad people. And so that's kind of like where I began. And then I started after that in Christian television and then went on to mainstream television after that. So I kind of got to see both sides of the fence, from the side of the Christians and what they think about the rest of the industry, and then from the industry side and what they think about the Christian side. So I think that's kind of a foundation. What actually became of actually making it, I was producing it was just a film that was just pretty meaningless, worthless sort of film. It had no real redemptive value or anything in life that you're going to use. It was just an entertainment value kind of thing. And one night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and it was kind of in a cold sweat, I guess, and I was just like, God, what am I doing with my time and my talents and everything that you gave me? And it was like, I don't know, I feel like I need to do something just back for you. It'd been a long time since I'd done specifically like a Christian, quote unquote Christian project. But then I reached over and I grabbed the Bible. I just flipped it open and it flipped to the scripture that said, "You're a light of the world, and a city on a hill cannot be hid." And I said, "So are you going to put your candle under a bushel?" No, you're going to let it shine. So at that moment, I thought of that. After being at that time, I was in LA for about 5 years, and I knew Christians here and there, some on crew, some here and there, but not like this. I really wasn't connected with the Christian community in Hollywood. I knew Christians individually. But then I realized if all the Christians would just do their little part and just let their light shine, then it would appear as a fire. So actually, that then designed the front cover, what is now, the final cover, with all the little candles and that actually came out that very night. So by 4 a.m, I kind of had the concept, and I said, okay, whether this gets, fully funded or half or however we're going to do this, is something I want to do. So I'm going to do it, no matter how long it takes or whatever it takes. So that's where it started.
Well, how did you go about your selection process or go about finding the individuals that you found for the interviews, was there a specific process that you went through to determine who you'd go interview?
Well, at first we kind of made a little bit of a bullet list, but mostly it was through like somebody that we knew and they knew somebody, because I didn't want to get somebody who might be Christian, but then, you know, people on sets say, oh, he's the worst guy in the world to work with, you know, that has a bad reputation, you know. So I actually, almost everybody we interviewed were through personal connections, one to the next to the next. That way we knew, you know, historically they're a solid Christian, you know, or that type of thing. So it really wasn't like any specific game plan, like normally you would set out on a project, okay, you get them all attached up front. It was really more of a process. Like we would call one and we would interview them, and through them they would say, well, you really need to talk to this person. And then they would say, you need to talk to this one. And we ended up, you know, interviewing probably 30-plus people, maybe even more than that. And then we picked out of those the best interviews, and then we culled down that, you know, the best. And our first cut was like 6 hours, and I was like, oh, boy. So then we had to trim it 4 and 3 and 2 and just keep cramming and that's kind of how it, you know, began there.
So who would you say your target audience is for the film? Who's really the people who need to watch the film?
This was really made for a Christian audience. It's really not trying to tell the world who the Christians are. This was really made to educate and to inform and to give hope to, you know, aspiring filmmakers, number one, people who are maybe wanting to go in this industry, but their parents and their family and everybody says, no, you're crazy, you're going to the devil's playground, da-da-da. It's for them. It's for the Christian who's sitting out there in church who just doesn't have a clue about Hollywood, but they contribute to Hollywood. You know, when they go to Blockbuster Video or Redbox or when they flip on their television or rent a pay-per-view or go to the movies, they're contributing to Hollywood. And they don't really realize how much a part they are, and they're making their choices by, you know, this is what I want more of. So it's to that Christian who's, you know, entertainment savvy that they're going out, and then it's also to the Christian who just thinks Hollywood's the biggest, baddest bunch of evil people, and if you go there, you're going to be one of them. And it's to show that it's not, that they're like anywhere. It's a mission field, I guess, if you could say. That's something I never thought of before actually making this, and a lot of people in the industry kind of, that's really part of their mission. And so it's multi-tiered, but really it's for the Christians, and to let them know that there is hope and there is, you know, this is not a bash Hollywood movie. This is the good things that can come out of Hollywood.
How's it been received in the Christian circles?
So far, overwhelmingly, all the reviews and everything have been really, really, really positive, even more so than I thought. So I wasn't really for sure, you know. Obviously, you make something, you hope people like it, but really, it's been a diverse selection of people who have, even just personal friends that I've shown, you know, that maybe don't understand it, but they, you know, or maybe they're not even Christians, but they get something out of it, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. So I think overall it's been really good. I think one of the biggest parts is people didn't realize, or they don't think about it now, that there is a lot of history of Christians and Christianity intertwined in Hollywood. And I think people just kind of forget about that. And so I think that's one of the things that's really been the biggest feedback that we've gotten, is it kind of reawakens that wow, it's not just like this is a new thing and here's some couple of Christian filmmakers trying to do something. It's actually since the very, very beginning of Hollywood that there's, you know, there's things and there's ties that Christians have been involved with.
Well, what role should a Christian play in Hollywood as a producer of culture? Should we be, I guess, more involved in trying to reform that system and kind of recreating our own system? What specifically should we be doing as Christians in that industry?
You know, I really think it more comes down to what each individual is called to. And that's even like when I was interviewing everybody for the documentary, there's a wide array. I was primarily going for those in the industry, but I really do. I believe there are certain people that are called to just make Christian films or make Christian television or make just specifically, you know, witnessing and evangelical sort of things. I believe others are called to work on secular projects and mainstream projects, but they're a witness those people and to those power brokers. I believe some people are called to be studio executives and and go up the ladder, even if it's in a, whatever sort of organization, that they could go up the ladder, and when they get to the top, they're able to, find something and they can change what goes on the air. And so I think it's individually called. I believe that a lot of times you'll see one side of the fence, the Christian filmmakers throwing stones at the guys who are just out there making secular projects, but they're being an influence that you don't necessarily see as much. And then you'll have these guys throwing stones at the ones that are just making Christian projects, because they're like, oh, well, they're not as big budget and this and that. And so I think, a lot of that, like what you guys are trying to accomplish, ceasefire, even within the Christian industry, is kind of joined together, but don't judge people just because they might be called to a different thing, whether it's an executive or a producer or a director. And, try to be open-minded, as long as they're not doing something that's, obviously bashing Christ or something that I think, don't judge them on the surface.
Well, then, to flip that question, what could Christians do as consumers of Hollywood to be more influential in that industry?
Well, that's one of the things that I think that I really, even myself, I'm a movie lover, so I watch all kinds of movies, and I always have. And even in making this, I got a little more convicted myself by the types of movies that I put my buck down for, and that over and over, from not just one but 4 and 5, and I cited a few of them inside the documentary, but people were saying, look, you really are, when a certain type of project comes out, and if you're not putting your dollar down for it, then they're not going to make any more of it. And if you go and see this movie over the one that comes out that is a cleaner movie, then, they're going to make more of this one and not this one. And so I think the first time that this really came up, I think, was with The Passion, and that because it was really rallied around the churches is what made it a phenomenon. It wasn't just the curiosity seekers. It was really churches, that entire churches, preachers got up and said, there's over 100 million people that go to church every week, and 17 to 19 million that go to movie theaters every week. So what happened is all these churches got up and they started telling their people, let's go support this movie, let's go support it. And they actually went out and went to the movies, a lot of people that maybe don't ever go to movies, and, it became the number 1 R-rated movie in history. So all of a sudden, after 20, 30 years of the system saying Christian stuff does not sell, we're not making it, all of a sudden every single studio said, well, maybe we need to have a little Christian division, and so, and then all of a sudden Narnia popped up, and it made, $700 million. And so all of a sudden money is what changed the mind of the studio system, not, any individual per se or anything. It wasn't even the film itself. It was the money that it made. So if we're going out, even these independent, Christian films, or the mid-size one, or Fox Faith, by your choices and by you supporting those films, even if you have, qualms with some of the story or quality, by you supporting them, it's gonna allow them to have bigger budgets in the future, and it's gonna allow more to be made and more of a marketplace, and there will be more of a choice in entertainment by what you're buying and pay-per-view and TV and everything.
Well, we're here talking with Kyle Saylors about the documentary Hollywood on Fire, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that rating system and kind of that interesting perspective of R-rated movies and how it is that the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time was basically financed by Christians, and that R-rated movies have had more of a reputation in history of not being so favorable within the Christian community. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back, and we'll see you right back here in just a few minutes.
Welcome to Daily Reflections for Movie Lovers. From Hollywood to the Heart, finding nuggets of truth from the movies.
In the 2002 movie Chicago, singer Roxy Hart gets away with murder. She shoots and kills a lover who promises her an audition, but he lied. She figures he had it coming. In prison, Roxy meets another singer, Velma Kelly. They hire lawyer Billy Flynn, who has never lost a case. Both women are found innocent thanks to a compelling performance by Flynn. We too have gotten away with murder. The sin of all mankind led to the execution of Jesus. God demanded a punishment, but he passed our conviction down to his only Son, Jesus Christ. Jesus took our punishment. Thank God for grace. Thank God that Jesus took a bullet for our sins.
For more information, go to imamovielover.com. That's imamovielover.com.
Are you just watching?
Do you enjoy watching movies? The cool effects, the interesting characters, the explosions.
Yeah, you like the explosions, admit it.
Well, we do too.
But sometimes it pays to approach Hollywood media with a healthy dose of critical thinking.
Join me, Daniel Lewis,
And Eve Franklin.
as we discuss our favorite movies.
And share critical thinking for the entertained Christian.
So visit areyoujustwatching.com to subscribe.
And don't just watch.
And welcome back to Cultural Diplomacy. We're joined today by Kyle Saylors, independent filmmaker from Texas. We're discussing his documentary he and his brother Kenny co-produced, Hollywood on Fire. And we're discussing various topics about Christians interacting in the media. And right now we'd like to turn to the discussion a little bit toward the rating system, particularly concerning R-rated movies, kind of the unmentionable rating, if you will, in the evangelical circles. And yet, we noted before the break that the highest-grossing R-rated film of all time is a film that evangelical Christians and really all brands of Christians helped put at the number one spot, Passion of the Christ. So I guess our question would be, where should Christians draw the line when it comes to deciding what films to view? Should the rating system, just the letter by the title, be the deciding factor, or should we look a little bit more into the content of the film and the storyline?
That's a good question. I think, for each person, I guess it'd be individually. The Passion is an interesting example because it shows that a story, that was told accurately, that's what it was. It was rated R. And a lot of people, still had problems with that or whatever. But if you looked at the Bible, even when I was a little kid, my mom wouldn't let me watch Rambo, anything that wasn't Disney. And so I literally went through the Old Testament. I think I must have read the whole thing just to do this. And I wrote down every murder and everything that you could, through the whole thing. And then I showed it to her, and she was like, "Well, I guess that's true." I was like, "Look, Mother, it's all in the Bible. You let me read the Bible." And so she said, "Okay, well, as long as it doesn't have any bad words or any, other stuff." So what I did is I ended up taking my little VCR camera and my VCR, and I would go through and edit, and that's actually how I learned how to edit. I would edit the cuss words out and pause, rewind, and then I would make me a version that I could watch of, Chuck Norris Invasion USA or whatever. That way I had a collection of movies that I wanted to see as a kid that my mom wouldn't let me watch. So it's kind of a funny, I guess, analogy of, I think, there's multiple circles. I believe that now there's not as many, I guess, excuses now as far as, there are sites like Movie Guide and Focus on a Family. There's a lot of movie sites that watch the movies and tell you, okay, this has sexually explicit stuff that has this. So as far as like being a discerning, yeah, there are a lot of rated R movies that are great films that I would say even films that, you should support. And so I think that's one way to learn about them is to go to those sites and to find films from a Christian worldview. I say another way is just, if you know friends that have seen them, I don't know really where each person wants to draw the line. I know some people who will just about watch anything, and I think that's a little bit too pushing it, anything that comes out. Well, I'm just watching it. I hear this at work or whatever. So, I don't know the real answer, I guess, but I think it's an individual thing.
Well, I think that you bring up an interesting point about looking at the review sites and being discerning in what we view. I know that Eric and I both went to a college where there was an R-rated movie policy in place. We weren't allowed to watch anything that was rated R, and so oftentimes, just because something was rated PG-13, we'd watch it or rent it or buy it or whatever, and some of those movies are actually, content-wise, a little dirtier than some of the R-rated movies because they slip a little more in disguise and innuendo, whereas the R-rated movies tend to just be more overt about whatever it is they're trying to say. So I think that it's definitely, the rating isn't something that we need to look at as much as why it got that rating.
Yes.
It's like you said, the Bible, if we read the Old Testament, that would probably be NC-17 for all the sex and violence in there. And yet we read it in church every Sunday, and we put our kids to bed with stories from the Old Testament. So I think that, what you guys touched on a little bit in the documentary was the truth being a part of the storytelling process. I think it was toward the end of the film that subject sort of came up with the whole how real can we be as Christians. So maybe touch a little bit on that as far as what's your opinion, what's your background on how real we can be?
I believe it was Eric Clothet that was making the point as far as in the documentary that he was saying, look, the Passion wouldn't have been made. I think obviously we have to, as Christians who want to make great films, we have to take into consideration, I guess, a lot of things. One of them is obviously the way that you want to market or who you're trying to reach with your particular project. But if everything that comes out is popcorn and Candyland, you're not going to reach as many people, or people are not going to take your movie serious. It'll be more Pollyanna or whatever. And if you're trying to do a real serious message in it, it's not going to come across as authentic, I guess, would be the word. And then on the same token, I've had a lot of Christian, they say I'm a Christian filmmaker, and they send me the script, and it has more F words than a Tarantino movie. And I'm like, there's plenty of those out there. It's not like, you don't have to try to overdo it to try to fit in, I think that in the same regard, I've seen some movies that, I've never, that I can't remember what movie it was. It was a movie that I believe it was R-rated for violence, and but I walked out and it didn't have a single curse word in the movie, and not one person coming out of the theater said, "Man, if that would have just had the F-bomb a few times, it would have been so much of a better movie." Nobody ever really says. I've never heard anybody say that. Now I've heard people say, "Well, it needed more action or more drama or more of this," but so I think that there's a degree. I think sometimes, we're trying to be authentic, and so we're going to put a lot of cursing in. Now I think, if you're making a movie like even The Cross and the Switchblade with Pat Boone back in the day, I think it even had some cursing in it because it had to some degree to be authentic. They weren't trying to go crazy with it, but in the context of the speech and the situation, they were trying to be authentic with it. So I think it's finding that balance.
I can't remember who actually the quote was attributed to, or if it's maybe an anonymous quote. But as we've been sitting here talking about ratings, I think of the quote that I would rather hear an R-rated truth than a G-rated lie. And immediately two movies come to mind. As far as my viewing experience, the worst G-rated movie I've ever seen, it might have been actually PG, I'm not really sure, was in watching the movie Fern Gully. This is like an hour-and-a-half animated Disney feature that just felt like environmentalist propaganda. To which, to me, any movie that sets out with a agenda already pre-made, it doesn't really feel like a good story. So therefore, it's harder to be entertained by it. I've certainly seen other things with an environmentalist message that have been far more emotionally appealing as entertainment than that film was. And then to the flip side, I just finished watching a new film that just came out. It was a direct-to-DVD, and it was a movie extension on a TV show by the title of Dead Like Me. And the film, again being an extension of the show, is a very dark comedy about life, death, and life after death. And specifically, the title of this film was Life After Death. And basically about a girl that had died as a teenager and becomes a Grim Reaper. Very fantasy-esque type of genre, but deals with a lot of these real hardcore issues of death and loss and mourning and pain, and that was more appealing to me as an R-rated film than Ferngully ever was as a G-rated film. So I think we kind of, as Christians, get this little bit of skewed perspective that we like Hollywood to tell us what's okay to watch and not watch, and so we let them make up the standards, and they know that we're letting them make up the standards, so they're pushing that envelope further and further, making the PG-13 movies more like R-rated movies, and kind of sliding everything down the scale. That's sort of where I fit in the line, is I don't really tend to look more towards that rating itself, but more towards what's the film about, what's it dealing with, what's it talking about, and I believe that one can be entertained by a film and think along those lines at the same time. So, I guess a little bit of an interesting question here. As Christians, I know we talk an awful lot about boycotts, and I want to get into that a little bit later in the show. You've got your groups of Christians that are boycotting things all the time, and then you've got other Christians who tend to consume culture, as Brian Goodall will put it. You've got your cultural gluttons and your cultural anorexics. Do you believe, Kyle, that we as Christians, do we consume culture pretty much the same way everybody else in the country does, or do we consume it maybe a little bit differently than others?
I don't think boycotts work. I think that's, because if some big, Christian denomination says, okay, we're going to boycott something, and if their bottom line doesn't change, then they're going to be like, ha, it's a joke, Christians are a joke. And I think that's what's backfired a few times, and I think boycotts are, ridiculous. I think you just, be more selective, and if you're going to buy a film, obviously they're making more profit off you buying that DVD than they are off of, you watching it on television. So, if you want to watch it on HBO, maybe, but where you selectively put your dollars, I think we should put them toward. And I try to now even go see something that maybe I used to wouldn't have. If I know it's a really good film, that I'll just try to go, watch it in the movies. If I'm going to be going to the movies anyway, might as well watch something that I try to think that will help support something good.
Well, we're here talking with Kyle Saylors about the documentary Hollywood on Fire, and when we come back, we'll discuss the issue of boycotts a little bit more in depth. We'll be right back after this.
Look out! Halos and Avatars. Craig Detweiler's collection of up-to-the-minute essays on religious themes in video games. From a feminist reading of the Left Behind video game to an examination of bioethics and theology in controversial games such as BioShock. This exciting new book dares to explore the connection between the games we play and the God we worship. Pick up your copy of Halos and Avatars today at the Ceasefire Strategies store. That's ceasefirestrategies.net/store and receive free shipping on most orders over $25. Ceasefire Strategies is not affiliated with or endorsed by Halos and Avatars or its publisher, Westminster John Knox Press. Tapped in the pop culture? Then you are invited to be part of Ceasefire Strategies, a forum and web-based radio show discussing films, music, literature, television, in fact all of pop culture, and how people of the Christian faith continue to impact and affect our world and the art we enjoy. Check us out on the web at ceasefirestrategies.net. And be sure to listen to Cultural Diplomacy, the web radio show that is shaking things up with discussions ranging from Hollywood to politics. Ceasefire Strategies, encouraging positive Christian involvement with media and culture.
And we're back talking with Kyle Saylors about the film Hollywood on Fire, as well as other topics involving Christians in Hollywood. We want to get a little more into the discussion in this segment about boycotting films. In your documentary, you interviewed Ted Baer, and he talks about how the boycott of the Last Temptation of Christ, seemed to have worked because the film tanked at the box office. Yet other Christian organizations like Hollywood Prayer Network talk about how the adverse effects of the boycott, the negative publicity is still publicity type of effect. So what are your thoughts on boycotts? Do they work? Do they stir up more controversy and cause people to see the film, or do they actually keep people from going to see the film?
Yeah, I believe that, I think for most part, the more or less organized where they come out and say, okay, this is a boycott. You know, I don't know if there's ever been any really huge success. I'm sure there's been a few, but I don't know if there's been a lot. For most part, it pits you against them so that it's this, you know, it just furthers the divide, I believe. I think what happened, like in the Last Temptation of Christ, and like what Ted was talking about, I think people just said, I'm not going to see it. And they told their friends, I'm not going to see it. And they told their friends, and instead of having this curiosity approach, well, maybe I should see it now or whatever, they just said, and even obviously it wasn't just the Christians because they weren't really marketing it to Christians. Just people in general were, I guess, either offended by it or they heard the word, and when it came out and had a bad weekend, then they shut it down. So I think that actually works better when than just having it called an organized boycott. You know, I think it's just if you look at films, even Brokeback Mountain, which got more publicity than any film almost of the decade, but it didn't have a very big box office at all. In fact, a lot of the Academy Award movies have pitiful box office. In fact, they would be considered box office failures, except for the fact that they win an Oscar. And so, and they get enough buzz that, you know, a billion people hear about it, and they can, you know, finally get over the 30 million mark. Any other film that had that much publicity and only made that much money would be considered a dismal failure, you know.
Well, I guess the comment I wanted to bounce off that Ted Baer made, or Dr. Baer, had stated that the film made about $8-point-some million at the box office, which is paltry, at least in comparison to today's movies. But, well, he was responding to the point that people have made, well, if there weren't any boycotts, then it wouldn't have made so much money. People, you know, were more interested to see it because of the boycott. It gave it free publicity, which he then dismissed by saying, well, it only made $8-point-some million, so that really wasn't anything to say that it was a success. But that publicity factor is it's still publicity. Here we are in 2009, and Last Temptation of the Christ is still being thrown around as an example of a boycott. So, in essence, it's like, well, if this movie was so bad and did so poor, why do so many people still know about it?
Yeah.
If we hadn't done the boycott, the film kind of would have probably died a very calm, quiet death, and nobody would have known about it. Not to say that even necessarily that the film should have died or lived or whatever.
That's why I think it comes to just don't support it versus going out and actively stirring up trouble about it.
Well, even from an economic point of view, does it really hurt them economically? I believe one of the organizations out there went and bought up every VHS copy of it that came out and then burned them. Well, that's still money going into the studio pockets. And then on top of it, the people that physically protested with the signs went and paid money to park in the studio parking lots to then go and protest the studios. That's like, well, then they're generating that income from the parking. Yeah. So even from an economic standpoint, you're not really hurting their pocketbooks because they're making that money in other places that kind of offset the loss of the film.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it almost makes it like a joke. Like if The Passion would have come out, I don't know if there was a lot of controversy, and I think that helped it. But as far as like if the Church of Satan or the big atheist organization said, we're boycotting The Passion, you know, and they came out vocally and on CNN and everything, it wouldn't have made one penny difference in the box office of The Passion, but it would have made them look like fools. because it made so much money. And then they would have been, and so I think that's kind of it almost, you know, you're putting yourself in a situation when you say, okay, we're the Baptist or Catholic or whoever that we are not going to buy this, and if it makes a lot of money, it makes them look almost like a joke for, you know, like, see, nobody cares. I mean, I don't know. That's my
yeah. Well, I mean, people certainly have the right to see what they wish and not, you know, want to see and don't want to see, and certainly people are offended by various things. I mean, I certainly understand why the Jewish community came out feeling that the Passion was anti-Semitic. I understand the historical context of why they felt this way. But all that really seems to do when you turn it into the public sphere is just stir up that fire in everyone's souls to create this bitterness against each other. So even from that spiritual standpoint, economics aside, all we really seem to be doing is creating this resentment and bitterness towards one another by making public boycotts. So I'm not sure I really see, at least from my perspective, I don't really see any positive benefits of boycotts unless you're just doing it out of your own pocketbook. Like you state at the end of the film, the most powerful person that can affect Hollywood is the consumer. When you go to the movie theater, you vote for what you want to see and don't want to see with your money, and you're telling Hollywood, I want more of what I'm seeing and don't want more of what I'm not seeing. To me, that's a more effective way to get your voice heard than to do these public demonstrations.
I agree very much so. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations, you know, where it just, you know, if you're stirring the fire, you know, the flames get bigger, and I you know, I don't see it working as far as in a big organized fashion. You know, I think, yeah, if you come out and there's, you know, if you're a radio show host or something and you say, you know, I don't think you should put your money toward this film, then you might influence 50,000 people that might have went to see it, you know, that, so in that way I think it's good, but to say, okay, we're going to stand on the streets and put our banners up, you know, I just, you know, it's just going to solidify the resolve on the other side.
I think, you know, a shining example of that is I remember when I was a kid, the boycott movement was pretty big back in the mid-'80s, and we were boycotting anything from Lever 2000 soap because they had nude people in their, or half-dressed people in their ads, to Walden Books because they sold porno mags. You know, I always thought, how stupid is it? You know, they're a soap company. They're not going to show fully clothed people in their ads. You know, but it didn't stop them from producing Lever 2000 soap. It just made us look really stupid because we refused to use a brand of soap, you know, for an advertisement. You know, it didn't shut down a bookstore. It just made everybody look stupid because everybody said, oh, don't go to that bookstore. You know, so there is a lot of, you know, this sort of living holy and living pure that gets taken to such an extreme that we want to try to pretend like we don't live in the world. You know, we don't want to touch something because it might pollute us or contaminate us, as opposed to getting out there and fixing the problem.
And I mean, if you're going to live consistently with that viewpoint, it would have to be taken to such extremes. You know, you're not going to walk into a restaurant and ask the waiter before I actually order my food and pay for it, I want to know, in your kitchen, the cook who's making my dinner, is he having an affair on his wife? Is his wife having an abortion? I mean, you literally have to take it to that extreme if you're going to sit there and say, I'm going to boycott this, and this, and I'm not going to support anything that has anything to do with sin because, scripturally speaking, all have sinned, and you're never going to get away from that. So that whole perception of living holy has to be...
Yeah, they'll have a whole sermon about that, you know, don't do this, and then they'll all go to Chili's afterwards that has a bar in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they have it on one standard. It's like entertainment. They have a harder, more judgmental view than they do in their own place, you know. Oh, well, I'm not going to go to that gas station because they sell cigarettes. Oh, I'm not going to go to this store or Walmart anymore, or this or this or this. I mean, you'll end up, you'll never do anything in your life. You'll die a hermit.
And it's not that the idea of living holy is wrong in the mindset that they have. It's just that the way they implement it and actually apply it to the public life is still, I mean, we've made a lot of improvements over the past 20, 30 to 50 years because, I mean, when my grandparents were children, they could not buy a Monday edition. I mean, and not that they could not buy like it was illegal or anything, but they were encouraged not to buy a Monday edition of the newspaper because it was printed on Sunday. And in some denominations of that time, they also did not want you going to the circus because of how, debauchery filled the circus was. And those things have changed today, such as some other denominations that now allow card playing or social dancing. These things that we sort of now take for granted, or at one time were considered very sinful practices, and now they're more cautious in their stance, and maybe even in some they've completely done away with their original stances on. So I think we've made a lot of improvement in that regard, but that mindset, that feeling of the way we want to apply holiness to every little aspect of society for people who are not Christians and make them act as if they were, is still very much alive today. So that's an issue that I think needs to be explored in how we can actually implement and apply the area of holiness into our lives without having to go to those extremes.
And I think that's one of the things that we tried to bring up in this, and that I believe that is you have a kind of a double standard, I guess, because you'll have the same people who are sitting here and complaining about everything that Hollywood puts out, no matter what it is. And there's a lot of garbage out there, But I'm saying, like, if their son is sitting here and says, "Wow, I really feel called that I need to go to Hollywood, and that's where I need to be, and I need to be in the entertainment business," then the guy who's sitting here and saying, he doesn't like anything that's coming out of Hollywood, but then he'll turn around and tell his son, no, you don't need to go there. You don't need to do that because it's a bad place. Well, then, if you don't have the people who, they're lost people, they're not going to tell the Christian perspective through their stories because they're not Christians. So that the problem is that it's kind of like a catch-22. You have, we're trying to say, okay, we don't want Christians to go there, but we'd like for these, lost people to tell stories from the Christian perspective. And it's kind of ludicrous if you think about it that way. That'd be like if you're saying, no, don't go be a missionary because that tribe in Africa, they're bad, so don't go there and help them. Don't make an influence. Don't go build a church there. No, that's the reason that you go there.
Yeah. Or don't go be a doctor because the issue of pro-life or abortion. You need to stay out of the hospitals and stay out of being a doctor and helping people. Cause, it's that same application. So we're here talking with Kyle Saylors about the documentary Hollywood on Fire. And when we come back, we'll kind of conclude up the discussion, talking a little bit more back into the Christian involvement in media, and a little bit more of an exploration on the strategies of how we go about our missions, as opposed to going about our mission with our own specific theological core, and how we will go about influencing the industry as a whole. So we'll be right back after this.
Are you sleeping? Yeah, why? What, do you think I'm hallucinating again? They just look like what you used to draw when you weren't sleeping.
Henry has a sleep disorder, which causes him to hallucinate. But when he runs into an old friend and discovers that she's being stalked, he begins to believe that his hallucinations may be glimpses of her future.
I have no idea who it is. I just started getting pictures in the mail. He'd write poems on the back of each picture.
Emily, get inside! You lied to me. You have been hallucinating. I'm sorry, but there's something to this. I've been given a glimpse of something terrible. And what are you supposed to do about it? I'm supposed to stop it.
Cold October, a Michael J. Whistler short film, now available on DVD and video on demand through indieflix.com. For more information, check out coldoctoberfilm.webs.com.
you for a minute about Jesus. Have you taken him as your personal Lord and Savior? No? Then you're probably not in politics.
You're equally American if you're a Hebrew, a Jew, or a Christian, or a Muslim. You're equally American if you choose not to have faith.
Now, I know George Bush says Jesus Christ changed his heart. But believe me, Dick Cheney changed it back.
There are people out there, hundreds of thousands of them, probably millions of them, who are praying for Bill Maher. And he probably thinks that's icky. People really believe in God in this country. We're a God-fearing country.
Religion. It's a powerful healing force in a world torn apart by religion.
I mean, the funny thing about this is, I'm calling liberals godless. Oh, they're cool with that. Just don't attack the Jersey girls.
Well, isn't that special?
We formed the moral majority. And we weren't intending to say that everyone else is of the immoral minority.
Here's something you ought to say first thing when you wake up in the morning. Here's something you ought to say just before you go to sleep at night. Here's something we always say on the third Wednesday in April after the first full moon in spring at 4 o'clock when the bells ring.
We are here to take a stand for our religious liberties and our religious freedoms. And they are under attack.
I'm telling you that that's the only righteous message for this evil nation that has gone the way of the Brokeback Mountain. God's wrath is upon this nation.
No one is to stone anyone until I blow this whistle. Do you understand?
You know, I rather like this God fellow. It's very theatrical, you know. Pestilence here and a plague there. Omnipotence. Got to get me some of that.
Guys! How are we supposed to have a conversation when everybody's talking at once? What's happening here? Why is the gospel of love dividing America? Never mind. I'll find out for myself.
For more information, check out www.lordsaveusthemovie.com. And we're back with Cultural Diplomacy. Welcome back. We're here with Kyle Saylors talking about the documentary Hollywood on Fire. And I want to go back into the documentary, kind of going back to some of Ted Baer's comment we talked about earlier about the boycotts and how how he felt that it was really a success for Last Temptation, or at least it seemed that was his point. And then the Hollywood Prayer Network talks about the ineffectiveness of boycotts. With more and more Christians getting involved in media, and certainly we need a lot more involved, do you believe or see that there's going to be more agreeance and support from Christians, or do you see the trend kind of becoming just as divided as we are now, with additional schools of thought coming into play on what our mission should be in Hollywood, what our strategy should be? Do you see that there might be some varying perspectives that come into that and hopefully don't cancel each other out? But do you think that we'll kind of unify as a community or be just as divisive as we are currently?
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can unify. I see it all the time, and even when I made this, and I didn't really I wasn't trying to do anything negative, but they're inside of this documentary. But there's a lot of division in the Christian community, like I was a little bit mentioning earlier, and I some of it's out of their worldview versus the other ones, and it's just like denominations. I don't think it's there's some of them are divided by one scripture verse, and so sometimes they'll fight against each other and stuff. But I think it's all kind of in the big grand scheme of God and everything that is all petty stuff. And I think that if we're going to really mobilize and really influence the industry, and I mean, the reason that the films that get chosen, like back in the day, it was the Ten Commandments. That was the big Academy Award movie. That was the movie that everybody in the industry and everybody in the world wanted to see, and it was basically what would be now called a Christian movie, but it wasn't seen as that. It was just a great movie, but Christians were not, villainized, I guess, in the industry. But the problem is when Christians retreat, and I think that's what happened, is Christians retreated, and churches, instead of, saying, yeah, go, they said, all right, don't go. And then we had this degrading of the entertainment industry, which is going to happen no matter what, all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah, to any Rome, to any society in history that that people have, you know, the run of whatever they can do. It's going to slowly degrade and degrade. And so I think it's important that Christians, from, you know, like financiers and bankers and producers and directors and writers and everybody across the board, if that's what they're called to, that you go into the industry, you do whatever you can, whether that be from the Christian side. I think that it's good that, you know, I met the Michael Catt, who made Fireproof, and he said, you know, we're just a church. Our movies are just an extension of our church. We really aren't trying to be competing with Hollywood or anything. He goes, it's just, we were making what we saw as a lack in the entertainment industry as something that specifically was made to help churches and to help the process, and it was an extension of our church. He goes, you know, we weren't necessarily trying, so I can understand from his perspective why he makes what he does and how it's effective. And the same way with, you know, Ralph Winter makes X-Men movies and things like that, but then now he's starting to make some lower budget ones that are more Christian market specifically. But I think it's not, you know, one or two people that's going to change Hollywood. It's by, like Larry Poland said, when he first went there 30 years ago, took him 3 years to find 300 Christians. Now there's, you know, about 4,000 at least that they know of that are working within the industry. And, you know, you can see it. I can see it every once in a while just on network television. I'll see something talking about God inside of some episode of something. I'm like, where'd they come from? And I was like, you knew somewhere there had to be a Christian somewhere on the writing staff, somewhere that was able to put that in there. And I think that it should be as a, you know, encouraged, and now it's great to see all these Christian schools and Christian things popping up, but also be very careful, because one of my friends, a good guy from Texas, he had a great personality. He went to Hollywood. Within 2 weeks, he was a stand-in for the star of one of the biggest movies in Hollywood, $200 million budget. He became friends with him, and then within another month, he's hanging out with all the celebrities in Hollywood. And then he starts drinking, and then he starts doing a little drugs, and then he starts, you know, they're like, hey, will you pick up some drugs for us on the way while you're coming to the party? And he ends up running drugs for celebrities, and you know, he got caught up in it. He went from just having a pure motive of just trying to go out there and just, you know, do things and be an actor and this and that. And then all of a sudden, he ends up on a non-related charge, but a DWI in L.A. County. And they said his cell phone, I called and I was like, hey, Jeremy, I was like, hey, man, are you okay? You know, I was just worried about it. I hadn't heard from you in a while. Are you doing okay? And his brother got his cell phone, and he said out of all of his friends that he has in Hollywood, he goes, every voice message was just about people, hey, where's this? Where are you at? Where's my stuff? And he goes, yours was the only voicemail that had anything of any that just cared about him as a person. So I think when we get into, if you're a Christian and you want to go in Hollywood and you want to make an influence, you have to get your personal life right with God, and you have to be who you are, no matter who you're around. Because I'm just personally, I've never taken a drink of alcohol my whole life. You know, some from my teaching when I was a kid, and some of it from a lot of kids in my school, you know, died from drunk driving in our little school. But it's just something that never appealed to me. I don't think it's necessarily wrong for somebody to take a drink or anything, but that's just my personal conviction. Well, I can't even explain how many meetings or places or things I've been, and here's, you know, alcohol everywhere. Here they'll throw drugs on the table. I'll just be like, okay, let's move on, you know, a little bit, not thanks. But it has nothing to do with peer pressure. It has to do with you and your personal relationship with God. And I have never had one person in all these years, ever one of them try to force anything on me. They're like, hey, you want a drink? No, it's all right, you know. So they can't tell me that it's just all about peer pressure or whatever. It's really making a choice of, okay, I'm going to be an influence, but if I'm not an influence it doesn't matter how great of a project that I make, if I can't personally be a Christian and a representative of Christ in Hollywood, then I don't need to go until I can get my act together. Otherwise, it'll just be a disgrace.
Right. There's certainly needs to be a support system for the Christians who are in the industry, and I certainly want to make sure that it's understood that there's room for the Christian film genre. We certainly believe that everything should be of that high quality in the production value and do everything to the best that you can. So it's not that that's bad in and of itself. There's certainly room for a lot of those films, and a lot of them actually are making great strides forward. So, I mean, that in and of itself right there, Christian films certainly have a place in film industry, and there needs to be a support system for those who are in the heat of the heart of the industry itself. I do want to read to you something real quick that's kind of a compare and contrast type of thing between two film festivals that or media conferences that are gaining quite a big gathering as of late, and I want to kind of get your perspective on if what's actually taking place between these two conferences is actually helpful to the industry, or if the two and their missions and values are sort of canceling each other out. The two conferences, the first one is the San Antonio Independent Christian Film Festival, and the second one is the Biola Media Conference. On the the San Antonio Independent Christian Film Festival site, they state as their vision, and I just want to highlight a few things from their vision page. The fact is that America is discontent with Hollywood's negative, monopolistic stranglehold on film and culture, the humanistic religious worldview of Hollywood elites, and their intense hatred for Christianity and the value system which it embodies has created a rift in American culture and profoundly damaged the American family. We intend to respond not by cursing the darkness, but by lighting candles. Building a community of independent Christian filmmakers is one such candle. The future of our culture will be, quote-unquote, waged in the hearts and souls of the people of this nation. The vision of the San Antonio Independent Christian Film Festival is to, quote-unquote, take back the culture for the Lord Jesus Christ in the area of film by encouraging, motivating, and rewarding those uncompromising, creative, and innovative filmmakers who are willing to take the narrow path. More than ever before, in the recent history of our nation, we have access to the tools for, and here's what just absolutely smacks me in the face, waging a new form of cultural guerrilla warfare against the elites who would redefine the biblical family out of existence and present a dark and nefarious vision of reality to the future. Who should attempt this journey of cultural dominion? Those who can think outside the box and who will not compromise their values for a paycheck. Then we go to the Biola Media Conference's website and look at their vision, and their vision statement is this. The Biola Media Conference has a rich history of advancing the integration of faith and the arts. The goal for the Biola Media Conference continues to be an impassioned desire to gather the collective wisdom from people of faith who have been working successfully in Hollywood and impart that wisdom to the next generation. The Biola Media Conference offers anyone working within the media, whether mainstream or ministry, a front row seat to learn from and interact with leading industry professionals working at the top of their field. The BMC focuses on the real-life practical issues of producing films and creating television and other media. Our conference themes are prayerfully crafted around the forward movement of our industry and how we can best be prepared professionally and spiritually for that direction. We proudly honor the outstanding achievements of pioneers in our industry with the Bob Briner Impact Award. As a result of the networking opportunities provided at our conference, we purpose to be a conduit where projects are birthed and partnerships are forged. Each year, strategies are identified and ideas crystallize as like-minded industry professionals share their expertise and forecast their vision for future opportunities to engage and impact culture at the Biola Media Conference. On the surface, these two conferences seem to want the same thing, and there's overlaps to be sure. But going deeper, one, the San Antonio Film Festival seems to be about fighting a war, waging and taking back, and the guerrilla warfare against the elites, creating an alternative system or industry, even making fun of Christians who work in Hollywood for selling out for a paycheck. and the other is about reforming or working from within in a more friendly, diplomatic manner. Both festivals and conferences love that medium of film and the richness of it, but one actually likes Hollywood and the system and the people in it and cares about them, and I'm not that the other doesn't, but the other tends to look at that system as, you know, that they're out to murder them in their sleep or something. Naturally, it's not hard to figure out where we fall on that line, since we call ourselves ceasefire strategies. But with drastic differences like these, are these festivals or these two perspectives canceling each other out as far as them being productive in the industry? Are they working against each other? Is it helpful? Is it harmful to our overall mission at helping people in the industry come to know Christ? Are things like this really helpful?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it's kind of ironic because one paragraph it says, you know, we're not going to curse the darkness, but they're blah, da, 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 da. Yeah. And, you know, if anybody else said that about their festival, they would take that as you're cursing us, you know. But now I do think that they both do great things, and I think obviously their market tailors to different people. Like, San Antonio is kind of in the Bible Belt, and so their reach in it, they have a really great festival, and they're growing and doing well. But Bible is up there, and, you know, brought in the mix of the industry, and a lot of industry players go there. And I think that it comes back to what, you know, if you took both Old and New Testament terms, I guess you could say Old Testament, you know, Joseph did not change the government or whatever, the system, by going against it. He changed it because he had a vision, and he went, and it was through trials and through God really propping him up into the right time at the right place. But when he came into power, it wasn't by criticizing everything. It was by having knowledge and wisdom beyond his peers that made him have favor in the eyes of the system. And the system allowed him, and he saved the whole country, not by battling it or raging it, but by being within it, but holding his integrity. And then you go to the New Testament, and, you know, Jesus was, you know, crucified. You know, so, I mean, there's that possibility. But at the same time, during his ministry, when it came to people, if you look anywhere in the New Testament, if he talked to two sets of people. When he came to the believers, he would talk more, anything that he said that was judgmental is for people who should know better. And when he was talking to the prostitutes and the people and the one that were just completely lost, it was always more calm. It was always in stories. It was always a little less. And I think that, yes, we should have and we can have a personal a battle, I guess you could say, against the enemy, but that doesn't mean you're going to battle against the people who are there and who are running, because they're people and they're souls, and you need to love them just as much. One example, we had never really done anything with him. We had pitched to him. We became friends with him. It was an executive at a major studio, or Spielberg's one it is, and we later did a project with him after he left the studio and started his own thing. But he just called one day out of the blue for no reason, never talked about anything with him, but it was just strictly business and stuff. But we started to become friends. He just called and he says, "Hey, are you guys Christians?" You know, me and my brother. That was it. He can't answer the phone. He's like, "Hey, are you guys Christians?" And he's like, "Yeah, we are." I said, "Oh, okay, I thought so." And he hung up the phone. And so we knew at that point, he knew that we're Christians. So we didn't ever even tell him necessarily or anything, but he knew that we were Christians. And so from that point forward, we knew, we have more responsibility to be there for this guy than even before this phone call. But I think if we live our life that way, I think we can influence it without trying to rip them down. I mean, in some cases, in the Old Testament, there are cases when God said, go rip through the village and tear it off and kill everybody, So, I guess God could tell somebody to do that, but I say in today's landscape, I would probably go for the grace and just infiltrating and loving people. And you can hate Satan all you want, but don't hate people just because they're, you know.
Yeah. Well, we want to give you a chance to share with our listeners where they can go to find out more about Hollywood on Fire, or to find out any about yourselves or any of your other projects.
You can go to Hollywood on Fire is HollywoodOnFire.com. You can click through there. You can buy. You can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the major sites, I think. It's in, I don't know, a few thousand stores. I don't know which ones exactly or whatever. I've been pretty busy. I haven't really been able to keep up with. It's in most Christian bookstores. If it's not, go to your one, order it. You know, tell them, hey, I want to order it. You can do it that way. You can find it online, whatever's more convenient for you. Find out more about us, SaylorsBrothers.net. Right now we have just a temp site up as our show reel, and a little bit we had, not us, but our hosting server got hit with some attack, so we just put a temp site up right now. But, you know, find me on Facebook or whatever, Kyle Saylors, and hit me a line. I'm always, you know, I always try to help as many people, because I've been where that, you know, I didn't have anybody, and I just had to network my way into, and I understand how it is, and so sometimes it's just a little bit of encouragement. But yeah, if you have any desire on earth to try to reach Hollywood in any way, I think this is a documentary that you should watch. I can't believe nobody's really ever made something like it. I mean, maybe they have, I just didn't know about it, but you know, I think it's a culturally relevant and, you know, at least an interesting perspective. We really didn't try to overly just tell our opinion. We tried to just interview everybody we could, and that's why there are some conflicting views even within it, because we just tried to let everybody have their fair share and say what they wanted, and tried to portray that, you know, equally with just, you know, the Christians in the industry.
Well, we want to thank you for having been a part of the show today, and we wish you the best in the projects that you have in the future. I know I had saw on Facebook that you had put as your status that you've got a screening coming up at the U.S. Capitol for another one of your films, so certainly a lot of success happening, a lot of things moving forward, and we want to wish you the best on that, as well as Hollywood on Fire.
Thank you. And, you know, I think that's one last thing, is that, like another project, we actually co-produced with she's a Jewish lady and a liberal, and me and my brother were conservative and Christian, but the project was Kim Jong-Ilia, and it's a great example of, we worked together and we made a project that's great, that it was, you know, it was in Sundance, and it's getting in almost every major festival in the world, and it's had rave reviews, but it's something that it was not one person or anything. It's a lot of people who came together that had totally different viewpoints on life, but we went and we did something great together as a team, and I think that's part of what that Christians should do, is, you know, don't just because somebody's, you know, maybe people need to expand their comfort zone a little bit, and to say sometimes to get a great project done, you know, you work with people of different backgrounds and different cultural things, and, you know, that see the world a little different, but by you being a part of it, you can influence the outcome of that. And through this documentary, we were able to show a lot of Christian elements and what's going on in North Korea and things that would have probably never been put on there if we had not been involved in the process. So I think that, you know, everything you do, you can have an influence in it.
Well, again, thank you very much for having been here, and we want to thank our listeners for having tuned in, and we'll catch everyone here next time on Cultural Diplomacy. Thank you, and have a good week.
Cultural Diplomacy is a production of Ceasefire Strategies, a ministry seeking to bridge the gap between Christians and culture. Visit us online at www.ceasefirestrategies.com. To discuss the show or learn more about today's guest, check out the CFS forums at www.ceasefirestrategies.net.
Acte est fabula perdite.